Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. All right, so the Browns and Myles Garrett have just agreed to modify some language in Myles' contract. So this report comes from Field Yates, who says this. The Cleveland Browns reigning and defending NFL Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett, just agreed to modified language on his contract that became official on Tuesday, per league sources. Garrett's contract previously called for his option bonuses in 2026, 27, and 28 to be exercised on the 15th day of the league year. So basically, previously his contract was aligned in a way that on March 25th, his roster bonuses for being on the Browns would become permanent. What this means is, you know, when like Kyler Murray gets cut or Kirk Cousins gets cut, and people are like, there's a deadline because after this day, a certain amount of money becomes permanent on the salary cap for that player. That's what they're talking about, right? It's bonuses. So Myles' bonuses hit previously on March 25th, the 15th day of the league year. In the amended terms, this is going back to a report from Field Yates, that date has been pushed back to 7 days before the regular season each year. The payment of the option bonus was also modified in a way to benefit Garrett. Additionally, Garrett had $8 million of his bonus of his base salary in 29 in 2030 moved into roster bonuses early in each league year. The modifications have benefits for the team as Cleveland now has more flexibility to create cap space in each year, and Garrett benefits with the modified option payments. Garrett agreed to the 4-year contract extension in late March, last March, ending a standoff with the Browns that started in February of last year where he requested a trade out of Cleveland, and then he did go on to break the sack record in the year after this. So this is basically, I think, a mechanism in the contract that was always going to be exercised by Cleveland and by Myles Garrett, right? This is probably part of the deal, which is, you know, adjusting it, tweaking it as it goes along to make the language make more sense and to create more flexibility for both parties, given that this contract was signed in the context of Myles wanting a trade out of Cleveland. And long story short, when it comes to this specific move, the Browns did it because it frees up cap space for this year. So if they want to make a trade for somebody or sign another free agent, they can bring in that salary and not have any issues being compliant with the cap. And obviously that would benefit Myles because Myles wants the team to be better. So doing that would be helpful. And then Myles gets to pocket some money early in the contract, which players always like to have their money sooner rather than later, because that, you know, once they run out of cash in the contract again, they usually just re-up for a new one and get some more cash. So this is a mutually beneficial kind of bookkeeping deal that they were always gonna make. But I do want to have a larger conversation about the complex and tough future when it comes to Myles in Cleveland in the long term. Short term, nothing about this is interesting. He's not going to get traded this year. It's not really interesting for this year. But long term, right, we're talking about Myles being able to go from Cleveland to Canton. If we're talking about Myles spending his entire career as a Cleveland Brown, well, that road is complicated because there are some things in play that have been in play for a while since he signed that contract that could make it so that Myles could get traded way down the line. We're talking about 2028 maybe, right? 2029. Like, these are when those mechanisms hit. But let's have that conversation because Myles' future in Cleveland is most certainly complicated because Myles Garrett is 31 in 2026. He's only going to get older from this point on. And while Myles projects to be the kind of guy who could play good football well into his mid to late 30s, if you're the Browns, you have to ask yourself as Myles gets older and older, where does the value of him in a trade become more useful to you depending on where you are in your rebuild, right? If the Browns can turn it around this year, or if they get a quarterback in 2027 or something like that, if the Browns solve their quarterback problem anytime soon, then Myles is going to be immensely valuable to this football team. But let's say the Browns quarterback questions continue on past 2027 and it's 2028 and you're looking at a 33-year-old Myles Garrett, and you can still probably get 2 to 3 first-round picks for him. Now that's going to be a lot more attractive. Now that's going to make a lot more sense for Cleveland than it did a few years ago, right? So you got to keep that in mind. We're not close to it yet. I mean, we're talking about 2028, 2029 stuff. Another thing to factor in is that if Myles does request a trade in 2028 or 29, it's going to be a lot more likely to be successful than it would be this year or last year. Like last year, he had no leverage to do it. He signed a contract, and that contract means that he might be able to push his way out in 2027 or 28. Definitely by 29, he could push himself out if he wanted to be out, because his base salary like balloons up to like $38 million a year. And if you're the Browns, that's probably like if you're looking at what season the Browns could trade Myles Garrett, it would probably be after the 2028 season, going into the 2029 season, when Myles Garrett is 34 years old, but set to have a base salary of $38 million that will be a cap hit of $62.9 million, right? Like no guaranteed money left at that point. So then the Browns wouldn't have to eat any losses for Myles Garrett at that point. So if they don't give him an extension in like 2027 or something like that, you know what the play is, right? Like in a couple of years, you're probably going to move on from him. And I think the contract was structured like that, and they're making the moves that they're making right now on purpose, because I think Myles understands that situation. The Browns understand the situation. If you're Myles Garrett, you want to give the Browns probably until the end of the 2027 season to prove to you that they can build a serious contending team. And if they can't build a serious contending team by then, the gears are probably going to start churning towards an exit out of Cleveland via a trade. If you're the Cleveland Browns and you can't get a quarterback or a contending team, a contending roster by 27, by 2028, then all of a sudden you're looking at Myles Garrett taking up $62 million on your cap, and you're saying to yourself, at 34 years old, like, I don't know if that makes much sense for the Browns going forward. So in the long term, as things are currently set up right now, I do think things are headed towards a trade. Not anytime soon, but probably around 2028, 2027, 2028, you'll know during the 2027 season, right? Like where things are going. But 2026, he's going to be here. It's very likely he's going to be here for 2027 unless the Browns get some kind of unbelievable Godfather offer that they can't refuse, which is possible. And in 2028 is when I think the Browns will be actually taking calls on Myles Garrett. And you would hope at that point they wouldn't have any reason to take calls, because they are a championship contending team and they have a quarterback and they don't need a bunch of extra first round picks. Everything goes to plan for the Browns, and they rebuilt this year. They're rebuilding the offensive line to support around the quarterback. And I think 2027, they're going to try to have some kind of a solution for quarterback. And then the Browns can have Myles Garrett on the roster, keep him until he retires, and then he can retire, walk into Canton, hopefully with a couple of Super Bowl rings, and we all leave happy. And I hope that is the outcome that we get. But the reality is that that's not 100% likely, right? Like, it's a chance that that could happen. I don't think it's a ridiculous outcome, but there's a chance that it could happen. But I think we also have to appreciate that, there is tension right now with Myles and the Cleveland Browns, because Myles does, as much as people clowned him for, saying that he wants to win it and re-signing with Cleveland, he does want to win. He just didn't have any options when it came to the trade request last year. The Browns weren't going to trade him, and what they were going to offer him was money. And if you're being offered, hey, you're not going to get what you want, but you can get paid, you're going to probably take getting paid. So he took the contract, understanding that contract would make it easier for him at the twilight of his career to be traded out of Cleveland. And I think that's the compromise that he accepted, that, hey, by the time I get to 33, 34, maybe if we're not ready to win a championship, I can get on out of here, right? I don't think Myles is desperate to leave Cleveland or miserable in Cleveland, but I do think he is frustrated with the current state of the team. And I think that's reasonable, because everybody who roots for this team right now is frustrated with the current state of the team and how shitty the offense has been. That he feels exactly how we feel about this team. Doesn't mean he wants to just give up on the entire process, but I bet he is frustrated, right? Like, he grew a close bond with Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz blows up, leaves a cussing, fussing mess because he doesn't get the head coach job. And I'm sure Myles Garrett was pushing for Jim Schwartz to get the head coach job. He doesn't get it. They hire somebody else. He doesn't know that person. That person has good reputation, but he doesn't know that person. And I bet right now he is frustrated. The team was miserable last year on offense. You feel like that miserableness on offense cost this team a year of elite defensive play. And then you look at what the team's doing in the offseason, and they're firing the coach that you like in Jim Schwartz, right? They're replacing it with somebody else, and now you got a new coach. I imagine there's a lot of frustration there with Myles Garrett when it comes to his relationship with the Cleveland Browns. I imagine it's not the greatest relationship in the world right now. When you hear reports that, like, they can't get in contact with him and they think he's too busy, I mean, that's indicative that there's not the greatest relationship right now. But at the end of the day, his contract situation and the situation he's in, he can't really get moved anytime soon unless he's willing to retire, and he hasn't indicated any willingness to retire. So for both Myles and Cleveland, the best option forward is to kind of just sit pat, see how things go over the next couple of years. And then if things go well, then things go well. There's no need to get a trade request, right? You're playing for a contender. And if things don't go well, then, it's going to be in both Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns' mutual interest to move on and get the assets they can recoup for Myles. That's how this situation's set to play up, right? They're going to get these next couple of years to see where they can build this team. If this rebuild is successful, if they are able to become a championship contending team, then it's very likely that Myles Garrett will retire a Cleveland Brown. But if they aren't successful with this rebuild and they can't build a contending team, then all this little tiny language stuff that we're talking about now is going to matter, because you're probably looking at trading Myles Garrett come the 2028, maybe even 2027 season, right? If it gets that bad. So, these things aren't the most overwhelming headlines in the world, but it can kind of tell you where things could go in the long term. Short term, there's nothing interesting about this story. Long term, things get a little bit more interesting because Myles' relationship with Cleveland right now is a bit damaged, and it was damaged when he signed the contract. It hasn't been helped by a 5-win season where the offense was dreadful. It hasn't been helped by firing Jim Schwartz, but it's not dead. I think it's still at the place where winning could solve a great deal of issues. If the Browns have a quarterback emerge, that could solve a great deal of issues. And you don't have to worry about Myles Garrett's professionalism, because that was the big concern when he signed the contract. Oh my God, he's gonna Buster Douglas, right? He's gonna sign this big fat contract and get lazy. That was like the big concern when the Browns signed him last year. Well, he signed that contract at the best season that anybody's ever had. So Myles is gonna be a professional. He's gonna play as good as he could possibly play to get through this season and find a way to motivate himself if the team is not at a place to where they naturally motivate you because they're in a championship situation. And he's going to play his best football, and he's going to continue to have a high amount of value going forward. Like, I think the idea that you need to trade Myles now in order to get the peak value for him is ridiculous. I think it's very likely that Myles Garrett carries the same value now in the trade that he will carry in 2028 because he's Myles Garrett. He's one of a kind. They've made one of him, and he is the kind of athlete that's probably going to be good until he's 38. So there's really no rush to get those picks that you could get from Myles Garrett. Maybe you want to make the argument that could help you get Arch Manning, but here, I think maybe this is a video for another day, but so much of this logic about Arch Manning kind of baffles me because it's dependent on, one, the idea of Arch Manning being this generational prospect, but two, the team that has the pick for Arch Manning being willing to trade him. It's a plot hole in that theory that I feel like everybody just willingly overlooks. But nonetheless, Myles Garrett's future with the Browns, it's going to be complicated. But hopefully winning can solve a lot of those complications. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.